Fall is in full swing, and it's a perfect time to refresh your wardrobe with pieces that feel as good as they look. Luckily, Quince makes it easy to look polished, stay warm, and save big without compromising on quality. Quince has all the elevated essentials for fall. Think 100% Mongolian cashmere from $50, washable silk tops and skirts, and perfectly tailored denim, all at prices that feel too good to be true. By partnering directly with ethical, top-tier factories, Quince cuts out the middleman to deliver luxury quality pieces at half the price of similar brands. I've been loving a lot of the home goods, including their cotton fisherman throw, which is the perfect addition to warm up your house for the fall. So keep it classic and cozy this fall with long-lasting staples from Quince. Go to quince.com/POTC for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's quince.com/POTC to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/POTC.
Anxiety is part of being human, and it serves a very necessary function. So it's a good thing that we have anxiety. It's part of our survival mechanism. It's how we stay safe. So anxiety is something that we all experience. And I personally do not have an anxiety disorder, but I absolutely know what it is to be anxious. I have plenty of moments where I'm anxious, sometimes because there is a real threat, and often, which is true for all of us, in the absence of a real threat, it's just that my body and my way of perceiving the world around me doesn't recognize that, or I have patterns of, perceiving danger that doesn't exist. And we all do that. Whether you suffer from an anxiety disorder or not, we all do that.
That was Noelle McWard Aquino on Psychologists Off the Clock.
We are 5 experts in psychology here to bring you cutting-edge and science-based ideas to help you flourish in your relationships, work, and health.
I'm Dr. Debbie Sorensen, a clinical psychologist practicing in Mile High, Denver, Colorado, author of Act for Burnout and Act Daily Journal.
From America's Heartland, I'm Dr. Emily Edlin, a clinical psychologist based in Chicago, Illinois, and author of Autonomy Supportive Parenting.
Calling in from Vienna, Austria, I'm Michael Herold, ACT coach, confidence trainer, and the author of an upcoming book on developing your confidence and social skills.
From Boston, I'm Dr. Yael Schoenbrunn, faculty at Brown University and author of Work, Parent, Thrive, and an upcoming book about misunderstanding.
And from coastal New England, I'm Dr. Jill Stoddard, author of Be Mighty, The Big Book of ACT Metaphors, and Imposter No More.
We hope you take what you learn here to build a rich and meaningful life.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock.
Hi, listeners. I have a few quick reminders before we get to today's interview. Stay tuned for my co-host post with Michael, where we talk about our experiences with anxiety and what we took from today's conversation. And remember, you can support our podcast in 2 ways. You can sign up on Patreon and enjoy an ad-free listening experience. Go to our show notes or our website to sign up today. And you can share this episode. Thanks so much for your support. Let's get to the interview. Noelle McWard Aquino is a Chicago-based therapist who specializes in the treatment of anxiety disorders. She is the author of Anxiety Unpacked: Discover Your Type and Recover Your Peace, a best-selling book that helps readers identify and work with the specific patterns driving their anxiety. Her work has been featured in publications including Psychology Today and Psychotherapy Networker. Noelle speaks regularly to both clinical and general audiences, training therapists in her framework for understanding anxiety and helping individuals develop more effective, compassionate responses to it. Welcome to Psychologists Off the Clock, Noelle.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, I've been really excited to have this discussion today. You and I have talked before coming into the recording about where this discussion could fit. This is not just another book about anxiety. I see it really as a good discussion point for today's modern anxiety specifically.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of mental health professionals in our audience, and of course, non-professionals who are just interested in psychology topics. So I imagine that many listeners will think, oh, anxiety is a well-covered topic. But today, what I hope for is that we're going to explore anxiety differently than we did in graduate training or even in a lot of popular media. Because what I loved about your book, which we'll get into, is it offers a really straightforward and accessible explanation of anxiety that has nothing to do with a DSM diagnosis and tools that can be useful for anyone experiencing any type of anxiety. So, which, as we'll start with, is likely most of us in these modern times.
All of us.
Yeah. I was thinking, I don't know if I have met an adult my age who doesn't experience a level of anxiety.
Right, exactly. And one of the things that I speak to in the book is that anxiety is part of being human, and it serves a very necessary function. So it's a good thing that we have anxiety. It's part of our survival mechanism. It's how we stay safe. So anxiety is something that we all experience. And I talk about myself in the book that I personally do not have an anxiety disorder, but I absolutely know what it is to be anxious. I have plenty of moments where I'm anxious, sometimes because there is a real threat, and often, which is true for all of us, in the absence of a real threat, it's just that my body and my way of perceiving the world around me doesn't recognize that, or I have patterns of, perceiving danger that doesn't exist. And we all do that, whether you suffer from an anxiety disorder or not, we all do that. So while the book hopefully will help people who have identified that anxiety is something that they struggle with in their lives, and I have a son who has lived with anxiety for most of his life and has been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder and obsessive compulsive disorder. And I really have seen firsthand the distress and pain that comes with living with those disorders. My hope is the book is relatable to anybody because we all do experience anxiety in some form.
Right. And especially as we'll talk a little bit about with the current state of the world. So what do you think of the idea that anxiety is an understandable response to our modern environment rather than a disease or pathology?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. Because again, the idea that anxiety exists when we face threat or danger as a way of keeping us safe in its most, like if we strip it down to like its most basic form, but also to propel us into action. I mean, that's another purpose of anxiety. And there is so much in the world right now that is causing people real distress. It's causing people real harm that does represent real threat. And so to have a response of anxiety to that is completely appropriate.
I think there's the macro level of our world and anxiety stimulus, such as mass shootings, the reality of climate change, those things that are understandably causing this sort of baseline global anxiety, even at an individual level. And there's the micro level of, I pinpoint a lot of it on technology, where I feel like there's this constant arousal of our nervous system through our phone constantly pinging, the email accessible in our hands 24/7.
Yes.
And just that kind of like, we're always in a state of alert, or if we don't take intentional action, it's easy to be in a constant state of alert that then kind of raises our risk to have anxious responses to other stimuli. That's my theory. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you had suggested to me, let's talk about anxiety in the modern world, I mean, my mind went in many different directions because there's so many different ways we could talk about that. But a really obvious one was technology. And I would add under that umbrella, social media. I would add under that umbrella, like just the onslaught of information that is available to us. So I think there's like multiple levels to that umbrella of technology. And you're actually raising one that I hadn't thought about, which is just what it does to our nervous system every time a notification goes off on our phone. How that like triggers this response of urgency, and that we feel this added pressure, like because I got an email or because I got a text, it means I have to respond. And that certainly creates levels of stress, overwhelm, and anxiety.
Well, I think you bring up pressure, there's this feeling of very blurred boundaries between our personal lives and our work lives, if our work life is in our hands at all times, essentially. And I find myself needing to draw really intentional, clear boundaries. Or if I get that email, I can't help but read it and then start thinking about it when I'm with my kids. Right. And I would rather not do that. I prefer to have the space and the boundary between work and personal life, home life.
Absolutely. And, I work with, in addition to my work with individuals, I do a lot of couples therapy as well. And a complaint that regularly gets voiced in couples therapy is about one or both partners being on the phone. Yeah. And that taking time away from the kids, or that taking time away from their connection. And so the accessibility of it and the sense of pressure and urgency, and it does require setting boundaries, which everybody understands intellectually. I don't think there's anybody who doesn't understand that would be helpful. And yet we're all terrible at doing it. Yeah. And part of that is the way this technology is designed to keep us engaged with that. It requires being so intentional and working against impulses that get so ingrained in us so quickly just by having the access to the technology and the onslaught of information and notifications and ways of zoning out through scrolling on social media and all of that.
Well, I like how you framed that. And I want to just emphasize that this really is not an internal failing on an individual level, right? This setup is really working against how we're wired to have to follow those impulses, and it's exacerbating kind of what we're wired to do. But it's that mismatch we've talked about before in other episodes of the podcast, that mismatch between our evolutionary wiring and what we're built for and this modern environment.
Yes. And that includes, the onslaught and availability of information, because our brains were not designed to be able to process this much information. And I read something yesterday, and I'll find the reference, for the notes, but it was a NIH study. And it said that the amount of information that's created every 2 days equals the amount of information that was created from the start of civilization till 2003, which I find impossible to believe.
Wow.
But that was a stunning thing to read.
Right. And that is a cognitive task that is so exhausting. And there was part of your book where you talked about a feature of anxiety is difficulty making decisions.
Yes.
Partially because you want to make the perfect decision and the just right decision, right? But I think also we just have too many options. There are too many choices. It's like the kid that gets overwhelmed in the toy aisle. And then when you just say, okay, just pick between these two, it's easier to make a choice.
That's right.
But when we're planning a trip, I mean, how many reviews are we going to read if we're going to a new restaurant? All of this, there's so much to filter. And that takes a cognitive toll.
It does. Absolutely. And that's right. And decision making is a feature of anxiety, and that can present in, two different ways, like two of the different categories I talk about. Like in catastrophizing, it roots in like our mind imagines all the worst case scenarios that are going to happen with each decision. So we feel like we have to consider every possible scenario and outcome, which is paralyzing. And not helpful, because we can't predict the future and know what's going to happen. And then for people whose anxiety is more rooted in control, it's about like picking the right, perfect decision so nothing bad happens, and, also impossible and paralyzing.
Right. I love that teaser for later when we get into your roots of anxiety. So I wanted to reference, you had a recent article in Psychology Today called When Anxiety Makes Sense. And there is a quote that is so lovely and I think captures your whole approach. So I wanted to pull it out.
Oh, great. Thank you.
In times of profound uncertainty, we don't need perfect answers. We need presence, permission, and connection. Anxiety is not a flaw to be eliminated, but a signal to be honored. When we allow it, name it without judgment, and gently guide it toward purposeful action, we begin to reclaim agency in the midst of chaos. So well said.
Yeah, thank you.
But I think it really captures modern anxiety, that there's so much uncertainty at every level of our world.
Yes.
And we're, like we've been talking about, we're all kind of wired to have these anxious responses to this kind of world we're now living in. This was just a beautiful reframe that I think
Thank you.
makes it easier to really start exploring and working on your own individual experience of anxiety with that sort of framework.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that for a long time, and I think that just by the nature of that, anxiety doesn't feel good, so we want to avoid feeling it. There was maybe a focus on challenging your anxiety, and to me, that just sets up a battle that is exhausting, and I don't know how many people win it. I think there's much more of a focus now on, can you make space for it? Can you bring curiosity to it, and see it as a signal? And I make the distinction between the feeling of anxiety and the story that gets created around it. So we don't want to be curious about the story, but we do want to be curious about the feeling, and then how we can guide that towards purposeful action so that it's being useful. Or to distinguish that actually I might be feeling this, but this is because of old wiring or certain patterns in how I am perceiving things, and it doesn't belong here. So, where we can distance from it.
So with this excellent article, which we'll link to in the show notes, your book, and the talks that I know you give, what do you want to communicate to people about our modern relationship with anxiety?
So again, to lean into when it's there, to allow enough space for it, to be curious about it. And then there's a lot of things that I do want us to do around the anxiety. And this gets into some of the specific anxiety types. When we're prone to catastrophizing, learning how to discern between what is, meaning what you know to be true, what are the facts, what is happening right now, from the what if stories we create. Doing that process is really helpful and important. And I would say especially in this modern world, because as you mentioned earlier, there are so many things to be worried about. And it's very easy to jump to these, future worst case outcomes around them. And if we're going to be helpful with any of these issues, we have to bring our focus back to what is and start there. We have to discern what's within our sphere of influence and what is in our control and bring our attention to that. It's very easy to get drawn to the things that are not in our control, either because they're not fair, they're not right, or because we're more concerned about trying to change somebody else and what they're doing or what they're thinking or what they're feeling, all of which is futile. And so being able to bring ourselves back to what is in our control, what's in our sphere of influence, figuring out what is ours to do within that. And I think one of the things that really helps guide that is being in touch with our values and what's important to us and who we want to be in the world and how we want to show up in the world. And also with that, though, having some boundaries of recognition of how much capacity you have, because I think that's another important side of this, is that we have to work within our capacity. And the last piece I think is really to be in connection with other people and, in community with other people, either who feels the same way or who understand how we feel or who can just show that they care about how we feel about things that are concerning to us.
Right. Having that validation and support makes it less isolating and scary if we are really in tune with those connections.
This summer, I've started asking myself a question. Could I maybe have ADHD? It's a question that has come up more frequently as we've had guests on our podcast who have discussed this topic. The jury is still out on it and probably will be for a while longer, but I am consuming a lot of resources on the topic, and one podcast that I have been binging is ADHD Aha. And that was a long time before they actually became a sponsor of this show. Every episode, ADHD Aha has a guest on who talks about the moment they realized that they have ADHD, how it showed up for them, and how they adjusted to it. In an episode with Jesse Anderson, for example, that I listened to this morning, he talks about the difference between importance-based task management and interest-based task management. And I thought, wait, that's me. So for someone like me who only has a surface understanding of what ADHD actually is about, this is incredibly interesting and useful. To listen to ADHD Aha, search for ADHD Aha in your podcast app. That's ADHD Aha with Aha spelled AHA and an exclamation point at the end because it's really that good.
So in your book, you start with 5 fundamental truths of anxiety that apply regardless of the source or type that someone's experiencing. And I really love this simple framework because it captures the experience of anxiety regardless of where your anxiety lies on the wide continuum. So could you outline these 5 truths?
Sure. So the first one is that breathing is essential. And I wrote about this because in my experience working with clients, many people who have experienced anxiety have been told at some point along the way to breathe. And I don't think that people are often explained why you need to breathe. So if you're somebody who is feeling intensely anxious and somebody tells you just breathe, you probably, would like to slap them. Like that probably feels very unhelpful to be told to breathe. But there's a really important reason why that is an essential skill to develop. And it has to do with what happens physiologically in our body around anxiety. So anxiety means if we are feeling anxious, we are experiencing physical symptoms in our body, increased heart rate, shallow breathing. We might have this pent up energy feeling, restlessness, fidgetiness. We might be sweating. There's all kinds of symptoms that come with that. Those symptoms exist because a part of our brain, the amygdala, has triggered a response in our body that releases a number of hormones, and adrenaline is one of them. And it is the presence of adrenaline in our system that creates all those symptoms of anxiety. We call that response the autonomic nervous system response, or the sympathetic nervous system response. And then the parasympathetic nervous system response is the one that tells your brain, I'm safe now. And so you can shut this response down and we can return to a state of calm and stability. Breathing is the fastest and most effective way to trigger that parasympathetic nervous response. It is impossible to stay at a physiologically aroused rate and do deep breathing at the same time. It's just not physiologically possible. So it's what tells your body, I'm safe, I'm okay, and helps bring down all those physical symptoms of anxiety. It's also what then allows you to have access to the more rational thinking parts of our brain, which then can kick in and be a further resource to us.
I'm sure many therapists are aligned with this. It's one of the first things I do with every client. I do it with my kids. I do it with myself all the time. Yep. And living it, you just realize how simple yet powerful the act of deep breathing, not regular breathing.
Yes.
Deep breathing. We do have an episode on polyvagal theory that we'll put in the show notes that expands on the whole physiology. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the first truth of anxiety. The second one is the most common human response to anxiety is avoidance. And avoidance will never relieve your anxiety. It might provide short-term relief, but it also guarantees long-term suffering. And so while our impulse is to avoid, we have to understand that if we truly want to shift our relationship with our anxiety or overcome our anxiety, the only way to do it is to step into our discomfort and step into our fear. We cannot overcome anxiety from a distance or think our way out of it. So we do have to step into it. So that is the second universal truth. It's not a fun one, but it's true nonetheless. The third one is that our minds can only focus on one thought at a time. And so what this is really speaking to is, and I don't want it to be misunderstood as this is just a matter of just change your thinking and that changes your anxiety. But what we do know is if we're focused on an anxiety producing thought, like, I can't handle that, this is too much, like, this is going to be terrible, we will reinforce the anxiety. If we can shift our focus to something that's either calming or neutral, I've got this will be okay. This may be hard, but I'll get through it. I can be uncomfortable and safe at the same time. It will calm us and it will break some of the cycle of reinforcing the anxiety. And there is a way in which, because we do have to step into our discomfort in order to overcome it, I also feel it's really important that people are equipped with tools to help them tolerate that. And to me, there are a lot of tools that we can use that I think of as being useful distraction, which is just that it helps shift us away from being so focused on the fear and helps us to access parts of us that can feel calm. So whether that's using a mantra or listening to music that we like or a favorite podcast or thinking of a place that feels calming to us or somebody that we love. I mean, these are ways that we can use how we focus our attention to help us tolerate discomfort. So that's the third one. The fourth one is that in any situation that has an emotional charge for us or that we care about in some way, there's going to be things we know and things we don't know. And things we know are things like what we can observe. It might be what somebody directly tells us about what they're thinking or feeling. It might be common facts or knowledge. So there will be things we know and there will be things we don't know. And the things that we don't know are what somebody else is thinking, what they're feeling. We might see somebody behaving in a particular way, but we may not know why they're behaving in that way. If we are in an emotionally charged situation, something that is meaningful, triggering for us, around the things we don't know, we will always create a story to fill in the blanks of what we don't know. That story will always be a representation of our greatest fear and vulnerability. We will relate to that story as if it is the truth. And very often if we can kind of step back when we feel particularly distressed and ask ourselves, what part of this am I actually upset about? Is it what's happening? Or is it the story I've created around what's happening? It's almost always the story that I've created around what's happening. And that story is almost never true. And so there's a lot of elements to that. But this is something I talk about with my clients all the time. And I will have many clients, say to me in sessions, I know you're going to tell me this is a story, and then they'll go on and they will tell me a story. And, right. But they've already are starting to catch that. But because they hear me talk about it so much, they also start to recognize it themselves when they are telling themselves those stories and they learn how to pull back from them. And I don't know how to stop this from happening because I truly think this is just the human condition.
The human brain.
We all do it.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's enough attention put on how often we do this and how if you can catch yourself in that, it then can really help you to disengage from the story and refocus on just the parts that we actually know.
Can I share a recent example?
Yes,
from my own life? It's so funny because I'm a so-called, and I hate this term, but parenting expert. And yet I struggle all the time, right, with my own kids and parenting. And just this week, we discovered that my 10th grader did not do her summer reading as assigned, which I'm sure there is a huge percentage of 10th graders that did not do their summer reading. But I noticed my anxiety kick in around these stories around work ethic, future success.
Yeah.
And I had to pull back, remind myself of evidence that she does have a good work ethic 95% of the time. And what's my fear? That she completely fails out of high school? And how likely is that based on not reading a book over the summer?
Yes.
So maybe I can just back off a little bit.
And I love that you share that. And yes, I mean, again, like we've all been there. Like I certainly can relate to those stories too. And it is like just so helpful to stop and pause and like, what am I really afraid of here? And how realistic does that actually sound? Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
I mean, the examples are endless in all of our lives, I'm sure.
All of us. All of us. So it's a really important piece, I think, for understanding anxiety. The very last one, the fifth, universal truth, is that there's a constant interplay between our thoughts, our feelings, and by feelings, I mean both visceral and emotional feelings, and our behaviors. And one is always influencing the other, but feelings are always the last thing to change. And so I that is important to know, because I think that many of us, feelings are the last thing to change. They're also the most important influencers. So between those three, we're always the feelings will always be more powerful. They will always override thoughts that we have. And so understanding that the feelings is always going to be the last thing to change, I think is really important, just in terms of having realistic expectations. And many of us sort of say, well, I will change what I do when I feel differently. Well, there's no way to do that first. And, so we have to do this hard work of, it's that being willing to be uncomfortable. It's that we can shift behavior, we can shift thoughts, but I can't tell somebody will just feel differently. So we have to do that work while we still feel what we feel, and trust that the feelings will change by doing the work.
That is core in therapy treatment, but I also think really good for people who aren't even in therapy to take that kernel of truth that we can't wait to feel better to do something hard.
That's right.
Or uncomfortable.
That's right.
So a feature of anxiety I talk about all the time with my clients is how it can be such a liar, that it's often lying to us about what to fear and what a threat is. But this is one of the tricks of anxiety. It makes us think when we feel anxious, there's a danger that we need to pay attention to. So when we believe this about our anxiety, it's harder to work on reducing it. And then it continues to significantly interfere in living by our values. And so that's how I see the anxiety loop. This is why I loved how you dedicated part of your book to distinguishing between anxiety and intuition.
Yeah.
So how do we know when we are having intuition or being tricked by anxiety?
Yeah. And it's such an important question. And I will acknowledge it's tricky. It's not like it's always super clear cut. But I would say, this is what I would say about it. Anxiety always comes with feelings of fear. It comes with sort of this like spinning experience around it. Activation. I mean, there's just a lot of emotion that comes, and also visceral feeling that comes with anxiety. Intuition, on the other hand, is calm. It's steady. It's quiet, and it's certain. And so the other thing that I think is a hallmark of anxiety is that it comes often with questions or with stories. So questions about like, what if, all the what if questions that we, what if I do this? What if this happens? What if it means this? Or stories to justify the anxiety. Intuition does not come with stories or questions because it already knows. And so it's really just said as a statement. It's just a knowing. I interviewed somebody who wrote a book about intuition for this book. And I asked her the question, like, how would you distinguish between the two? And the first thing she said is intuition is not fear-based. Mm-hmm. And so if what you think is intuition is fear-based, that's anxiety. That is not your intuition. So I think that it really does take practice and work to really distinguish between the two. And I think that often talking to somebody else can help us distinguish between the two, because it can all feel very murky. when we're the one who's in it. But I think we all can learn how to find that voice of our intuition and learn how to listen to it when it's present.
I also have had the experience, and how I picture it is anxiety can be like the cobweb masking the intuition, like obscuring the clarity underneath, right?
Yes.
And I just picture like cobwebs in my brain or something, like making it
yeah.
hard to tune in. But then once I work on clearing those out by really identifying what am I scared of, what are my worries, and then evaluating those and doing all this work, and then I can kind of clean it up and then get to the knowingness about what to do and what my intuition is saying.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think that anxiety does really disconnect us from, our true knowing and from ourselves.
Yeah. So we are finally getting to the heart of your book, which is your framework for anxiety that has nothing to do with diagnostic criteria, but it's about the distinct experiences people can have with anxiety, which I found as I was reading really relatable. I mean, I could think of everyone going into 1, 2, or 3 buckets, right?
Yeah.
Could you explain the framework, which is 3 root causes, and then we'll spend some time on each part?
Yeah, definitely. And, I'll just quickly say that this came from listening to clients, and that as I was working with clients who were working on anxiety, that I was noticing that there were these repeated themes and patterns in the ways that they talked about their anxiety, described their experience with it, even though the details of their anxiety were completely different, even though their personal histories were very different, even though their life circumstances in the present were very different. Sometimes where they all would sometimes say the exact same phrases or words. And that got me curious. Like, what is this that I'm hearing? And the way that it made sense to me was that they were really describing 3 different manifestations of anxiety, or 3 different ways that, like, patterns around how the anxiety, presents itself. And I started calling it the 3 root causes for the very reason that you said, which is that I could take any anxiety that a person was presenting in session and trace it back to one of these 3.
Mm-hmm.
So that was sort of my reason for calling it root causes. Not that it speaks to the individual reason why a person may have anxiety, and that's going to be different for every single person. And there's a multitude of factors that can influence that. And the more that I thought about these 3 different categories, the more that I started to recognize, like, they each have very distinct characteristics that make them different from the others. They each have a different underlying need that's driving the anxiety, which is what, understanding that is really important then in terms of directing the interventions in the way that you work with the anxiety so that you really can address the root of it to bring about lasting change. And also discovered that they each have a different objection or way that the anxiety fights to preserve itself, which I think is also really important to understand, and so that you can recognize it when it's present. So the 3 types are catastrophizing, control, and distorted belief.
So let's get into those. Catastrophizing. I think we touched on it and most people know what it is, but what's the evolutionary purpose? You kind of get into this in your book.
Yeah.
Why do we catastrophize?
So neuroscientists have found that that the amygdala lights up when people are confronted with uncertainty. And so the belief is that the human brain equates uncertainty with danger. And there was probably a time in our evolutionary design, like there was probably a time, when we were hunters and gatherers or living in caves, we're venturing outside of the cave or your very, very tight community meant that you could face danger in the form of a human foe or a predator, so that uncertainty became equated with danger. And that just is not something that has evolved as our society has evolved. And certainly there are many people who do live in circumstances and communities where this is still true and important. But for many of us, we don't live in those kinds of circumstances, and yet our brain still equates uncertainty with danger. So there's a way in which our mind believes that by considering every potential bad outcome, that it is preparing us for those outcomes, preparing us for what will be required of us, whether physically or mentally or emotionally. And yet this is truly not helpful and causes more problems than it helps. That's for sure.
Yeah, I put a huge star by your chapter called Becoming Comfortable with Uncertainty, because I think it's actually quite relevant to how we started this discussion today, which is in our modern context, how challenging this is. And we were talking about technology earlier. Whenever we have a question, we can just Google it.
Yeah.
We have AI to now give us these really elaborate answers. When we text someone, we expect to hear back. And in fact, my
Right.
kids expect me to text back immediately, right?
Yeah.
We can check location sharing to know exactly where people are. So I feel like there's a certain atrophying of our muscles of coping with uncertainty. And at the same time, there's so much instability and uncertainty at every layer of our modern world, from socially and politically to culturally. So I just think this is a really important feature to pull out, as I'm sure extremely universal.
Yeah.
So what do you say about getting more comfortable with uncertainty? How can we do this?
So I think that there's a few ways. And one is that because catastrophizing always takes us to all the bad outcomes around uncertainty. So uncertainty means something bad is going to happen. And this may feel overly simple, but it's something we don't naturally do. Even doing a shift, like imagining what good things might happen.
Yeah, I love that.
What possibilities might exist by stepping into this scary thing? The unknown is scary. And that is one way anxiety shows up for me, for sure, is stepping outside my comfort zone. And we go to all bad things, but if we can start to live in the possibility of what good things might happen, what I might gain, how I might grow, that can help us to tolerate. And that's really what we're looking for, is just this idea of, can you tolerate? Because the more you can tolerate, the more that your container expands and the bigger your comfort zone becomes. And then the bigger your comfort zone is, the less uncertainty or danger that, you feel, because it's when we step outside the comfort zone that we feel that. So I think that is one way to do it. And another way is something that I already touched on, which is really getting clear about your values and what's important to you. I've found that many people, when they're trying to make decisions, overly focus on what they don't want to have happen. Again, that's all the fears of what bad
to
things might
avoid,
happen.
what to prevent, right?
Exactly. And when you start to ask them, okay, well, what do you know you want? Like, what do you know is important to you? What, how do you want to show up, or what values do you want to express through this decision? Or, what feels important and meaningful to you about this? Very often, once people answer that question, the choices in front of them, it becomes pretty clear which ones most align with that. But it's just not a place that we naturally go.
Right.
And the last thing I'll say about it is that we want the certainty of how the whole path is going to look. We want to know, like, when I make this decision, what the outcome is going to be. And we just can't know that.
Yeah.
But if we can just bring ourselves to just what's right in front of us, you don't need to know the whole path. You don't need to know every step along the way what's going to happen. You just need to know, what's the first thing I need to do, and what decision do I want to make about that?
Yep.
And take that step, and know that more information will be revealed, and then you will take your next step. And I talked about it it's like taking a walk in the dark with a flashlight. Yep.
I was just thinking of that image right when you were talking, so it stuck with me.
Yeah. So I think those are different things we can do to help us be able to tolerate the uncertainty, and to, again, say, if you're uncomfortable, but it's something important to you, do it anyway. Do it scared, and that will build your capacity also.
Yeah, I just want to give a shout out to Jill Stoddard, our co-host.
Yes.
Whole mantra, do it scared. Well, and I think something you say in the book that's really important to highlight is also recognizing that worry and avoidance, these parts of anxiety, don't actually create certainty.
They don't.
it's again an illusion or a lie, right? That if we
Correct.
just really worry about it or avoid it, then that uncertainty will dissipate, but it doesn't. I'm going to switch up your order because I actually want to spend more time on control.
Great.
Because that is my personal bucket. But
Great.
let's talk about distorted beliefs. So say more about that root cause.
Sure. So distorted belief is when we believe something negative to be true that is in fact false. And when we're talking about anxiety that stems from distorted beliefs, we're talking about distorted beliefs about core aspects of ourselves. So that we hold a negative false belief about ourselves to be true that is in fact false. And these would be things like I'm unworthy, I'm unlovable, I'm a failure, I'm a fraud, I don't belong. So it's things of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
If the underlying need around catastrophizing is our discomfort with uncertainty, I would say the underlying need or the root of distorted beliefs, these are often formed in childhood, in which we come to conclusions and false conclusions about our experiences, our circumstances, things that we observe because we are trying to make sense of our environment through the mind of a child with the cognitive abilities and emotional and mental abilities. And also because children are so dependent on their parents for both their physical and emotional well-being that we will often, if we are living in sort of troubled childhood circumstances, shift the responsibility of that to ourselves and take it off of our parents because that feels like a way of preserving our connection and our safety. So I would say that distorted beliefs is rooted in our need for connection and our attempts to have connection or to get our needs met, or are just misunderstandings and misinterpretations of things that we experience because we were making sense of them as children.
So you do a really nice job. I'm just going to tease the listeners that you have strategies, very specific ways to tackle each of these root causes of anxiety. Yeah. And we unfortunately do not have time to get into all of it. And that's what the whole book is for. So get the book. Because I want to make sure we spend time on control.
Yeah.
When I read your description, I was like, does she know me? Has she met me? So this is your opening example. If I don't keep the list running in my head of everything that needs to get done, something will fall through the cracks. And I think, that's just a brief example. There's a lot more to this whole bucket. But I think so many, especially really busy parents, relate to this. There's just too much to track. And again, this is a feature of our modern world as well. There's so much to track that it exceeds what we came with in terms of cognitive capacity, right? And so then that creates anxiety because we want to feel a sense of control over the out of control demands on our time. So that's how I relate. The other signs that you bring up that are very relatable are over preparing, over researching, having rigid expectations and beliefs about how things should be done. So how do you see the people you work with fitting in this bucket of control? Like, what do you see, especially the interplay with the modern world, like we've been talking about?
So what I see is that individuals who have anxiety rooted in control 100% of the time are highly capable, successful, competent people who will describe themselves as stressed and overwhelmed and exhausted, but will rarely use the word anxious to describe themselves. And very often it feels like, and I don't want to totally discount this because to your point, there are so many demands and it's true that there's so many things that we're juggling, but it feels like all of it is necessary and that I cannot relax. I cannot stop. I cannot, let go of anything because if I do, it will all fall apart. Something bad will happen. And I think that that's probably the characteristic that tips it over into anxiety, is when it feels like I can't do any less. I can't let go anywhere because things will fall apart if I do. And I think that with this type of anxiety, many people really do believe that it is a completely valid and necessary response to the demands that they face in their lives. And that part, I don't want to discount the demands.
Right.
And I know that it is possible
ways to respond to those demands.
Yes. And I know it is possible to, be in the midst of those demands, be as successful and confident as you are, and to achieve a state of being more relaxed and calm and actually enjoy your life more.
Yeah.
When you tackle the part of it that is anxiety.
Absolutely. And I think it really helps my quality of life to be a therapist because I'm so aware of all of this, and I protect my relaxation like it is my life force, because it is. And so it's like my brain can't even work past 6 o'clock, so I don't even try. I love watching TV and just doing nothing. I love jigsaw puzzles. I love books, and I create time for all of that. And it's gotten easier as my kids have gotten older, just to, put that out there. But I have really actively prioritized those things. And I think doing that has then helped me have the resources to really push against my control tendencies around those rigid expectations and high standards and the over-preparing. Because I think, as you point out, what can happen is people think, but that's why I'm successful.
Exactly.
So if I don't prepare as much, or I lower my standards, I won't be successful anymore.
Right. And that's what I call the objection that keeps you tethered to that control. The truth is, and this is where the anxiety piece comes in, what is almost always going hand in hand with this for people who this is where their anxiety comes from. They are placing their success, their sense of well-being, their sense that I'm going to be okay and everything is going to be okay. They're placing it on external factors. That as long as what's happening out there looks a certain way, looks the way that I want it to, looks the way that I think that it should, then I'll be okay. And that is a problem, because if we're placing our sense of well-being on external factors, then we're never going to be okay, because we just simply can't control all of that.
Right.
And really what we need to be able to do is shift that to internal. That no matter what happens out there, I know and trust that I possess all the internal and external resources that I need to be able to cope, to be able to adapt, and to respond so that I ultimately will be okay. And when you can move that trust to internal, that's where there's space to let go. That's where there's space to do less, because you trust that I've prepared this much and that's enough, and it's going to be okay. And the ultimate statement that I hear from clients that tells me that they've mastered this is when they say, I just decided not to do that, and it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And if it's not, I know I'll figure it out.
Right.
And like that just says it right there, that, when you can get to a place where you know and embody that and trust in yourself, because what you're trusting is that I've done enough, and enough may be significantly less than what you think is necessary. I've done enough. It's going to be okay. And if it's not, I also trust that I will figure it out and it will be okay.
Right. It's that second layer that really packs the punch, I think.
Yeah.
Believing in your own capacities, capabilities, skills, who you are to handle whatever happens from not being as prepared as you think you should be.
Exactly.
Right? And I think this does take some exposure work.
It does. Yeah, it does. I call it setting up experiments for yourself.
Yeah.
And in the book, and that's, a lot of what the work that I recommend in this section of the book is exposure around changing patterns of behavior around all this and helping you identify how to do that and, what things you want to experiment with.
Yeah. You share a great story about a professor.
Yes.
Who invested so much time in each lecture that she had been doing for years. And she had the belief that it was spending all that time that made her such a quality instructor, and her students loved her and gave her great reviews.
Yeah.
And you challenged her on, is it really the time that you're putting in? Let's take the time down and see what happens, right? And she ended up freeing herself. There was this liberation when she realized it's actually, I'm a really good teacher with a lot of skills. It's internal. It's not the time I'm spending.
Yeah, that is a great story. And I use it every time I teach train therapists in this model, because it's so demonstrative of, what's possible when you can really embrace that.
Well, I think it's like we were saying before, questioning the stories you're telling yourself too about the function of some of these anxious behaviors. I mean, I think first we have to define them as anxious behaviors and contributing to anxiety. We have to become aware of the costs, because we get so connected to the perceived benefits that we're not looking at. But I am completely overwhelmed, burning out, and not enjoying my life, right?
Yes. Yes. And I think that with control in particular, it is the cost that it is having is what finally gets people willing to, do these experiments, because there's so much fear of letting go and doing less, because there's such a belief that it is the reason why I'm successful. And I think that you really also have to be driven at the same time by what you hope to gain. Like, there has to be enjoyment built into it. There has to be something good you're going to get by doing this that goes along with that, because it's so there. And more so with control than any of the other anxiety types, is really to identify, what is something good that I can bring into my life by doing this work.
Right. So if I spend less time on this task that I think I have to spend all this time on, what can I do with that time? What would I enjoy?
That would be enjoyable.
Yes. Enjoy.
Not what more work could I do with that time, right?
Right. What's something relaxing that I could add to my life and then just feel better? And I know too from my work that once people make that shift and they're doing that enjoyable activity, I mean, they never go back. It's such a fundamental shift of, oh my gosh, this feels so much better. I think what happens is people don't even realize how anxiety is driving their functioning until they start to really let go of it.
And yes, and nobody ever wants to go back to the way that they did it before. And also, I will add, and never once have I ever seen anybody become less successful or less competent. Right. And that's so important.
Not that this is the driver of it, but I think it opens up possibility to be more successful in ways important to you.
Yes.
Not to external metrics, but like your personal values driving how you want to be in the world. I think if you're letting go of some of the anxiety, the perfectionism, the spending a lot of time on things, you open yourself up to really be conditioned to do more meaningful work in your life.
I completely agree. Yes.
So, Noelle, I've really enjoyed this philosophical discussion about
me too.
modern anxiety, and I think your book is a real gift. I highly recommend therapists using it in their treatment. I had a client where when I was leaving on vacation, I said, I want you to read this book while I'm gone. It was very in alignment with the work we'd been doing, and she got a lot out of it. So I can attest to this is a really good complement to treatment. I would also advocate for people who just feel like they want to have less anxiety in their lives and they're not necessarily in therapy or needing treatment, this is a really amazing resource for the everyday person just going through their lives.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That means so much to me that you recommended it to a client, and I'm glad to know that it was helpful to your work and complemented it.
Well, you've done a great service to the world of mental health. Thank you for your time today. And for people who want to know more about you, where can they find you?
So they can go to my website, which is Noelle, McWard, and you'll put that in the show notes because I know that that will be a tough one for people to get phonetically. And I'm also on Instagram at Noelle McWard Aquino.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Noelle.
Thank you.
So you just finished listening to my fascinating discussion with Noelle about today's anxiety, and I hope it was a fresh take on how we think about anxiety in the world of mental health. And I'm here now with Michael to talk about our thoughts on the conversation. So Michael, what did you take from listening to the interview, which you said you actually listened to twice, which is quite impressive?
I listened to it twice, yeah. And I also skimmed through her Psychology Today articles as well. A fascinating interview. I have so many points that I want to touch upon. So I'm going to limit myself to those nearest and dearest to my heart. And one of them that stood out to me was when you two were talking about expanding the comfort zone. Because it's such a great thing, right? Our comfort zone is where we feel good, where we recharge. So why deal with all the anxiety when we can sort of expand our comfort zone and when we don't have to worry about that stuff anymore? And this is something that a lot of the clients that I work with, that is their initial solution to their problem. I just need to expand my comfort zone to a point that I will never, ever struggle again.
So it's trying to not be uncomfortable.
Yes, exactly. I just have to do the work once. And even better, maybe there's just one hack, one trick, one simple thing I can do. Just expand my comfort zone and we're good. Like I never have to deal with this discomfort again. And the truth of the matter is that is not an approach that's going to work. Because yes, you can totally expand your comfort zone. Like this really works. Just where you do things that you never thought you'd do. And that totally works. And at the same time, when you live a full life, there will always be new things that will push you outside of your comfort zone because you are driven by your goals, by your values, by all of those things important to you. I would work with people who say, hey, once I have a partner, I'm not going to be lonely anymore. Then I will be like good. Then they have a partner and they realize, whoa, this is now we're talking about different stuff that needs to be solved. But once we're married, then this is going to be good. And then they might get married and look at that. Like suddenly there's a whole new kind of, and then more and more and more. And they're constantly at the edge of their comfort zone because they're living a full life.
What's so distinct about anxiety is that it is both an emotion hardwired into our brains and considered a clinical disorder at certain levels. And so it's this sort of really complex continuum of emotional experience. And as you're saying, there's quite a bit of positive function to anxiety. And I think, you know, one thing Noelle talks about, and she gets more into it in her book, which is aligned with ACT, is the idea of kind of befriending our anxiety and understanding when it's trying to help us, when it's signifying something important to us, to pay attention to it, while also managing it so it's not controlling our lives or interfering with what is important to us. So where is it helping us live in alignment with our values, and where is it getting in the way as a barrier?
Yeah. And what you just said is one of the things that I actually can appreciate about anxiety. And I need to qualify that a little bit, because there is anxiety out there that is just horrible and people shouldn't have it and it's not fair. And then there's also some anxiety out there, some cases of anxiety where the anxiety's root is in us doing something that is incredibly important to us. Yeah. I was telling you before we started recording, I told you that, I'm anxious recording this with you. You like coming into the session record. I'm a little bit anxious about that. And that's not a bad thing. It doesn't feel super comfortable, but it shows me that, look at that. This is really important to you, Michael. Look at that. You're recording a discussion with Emily, and it's really important to you. How do I know? Because I am anxious.
So it's not a signal that something's wrong. And we talked about that. Like anxiety isn't always telling us, go away, escape, get away from this experience that's triggering anxiety. When we can really understand our anxiety and embrace it, we can see when it's actually a sign, like I was saying. Like I feel anxious. I love giving talks to parents. I absolutely love being in person and having a room full of parents and talking. And I get so anxious every time because it is important to me to have a meaningful impact and not just a rote, boring talk, right? I want it to be a really good experience for everyone in the room. And so I get anxious, but instead of trying to get rid of the anxiety or beat myself up for feeling anxious when I, quote unquote, should be more confident, I just remember that this is part of the whole process. And then when I'm up there, it feels great.
Yeah, I mean, the question to ask here is, what would you have to let go of in order to lose that anxiety? And what you would have to let go of was the caring about the audience. Right. I think we can both agree that you would never want to do that.
Right. Or just never give the talks, which is also not in alignment.
Exactly.
Right. What's important.
And so the price for admission that we pay for doing anything that's really important to us, or that it's really important to us and that we've been doing only a couple of times. I think if you did this talk for the 10,000th time, your anxiety would probably at a homeopathic dose. But the first couple of 100 times, like this is a passenger that's coming with us to like knock at the metaphorical door and be like, look at that, it's still important. Congratulations, proud of you.
Well, Michael, we could go on because I could talk about this topic forever. And I feel like you were inspired as well. And I really hope the listeners take a lot away from this. And I'd be really curious to hear from listeners about what their thoughts are and their experience with anxiety. And if this discussion with Noelle kind of had any refreshing perspective to give people. So thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you, Em.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock. You can now listen to our podcast ad-free by becoming a supporter on Patreon. You can link to Patreon on our website or go to patreon.com/offtheclocksite.
If you enjoy our podcast, you can help us out by leaving a review and sharing this episode with a friend or an enemy who would enjoy it.
You can get more psychology tips by subscribing to our fabulous newsletter on Substack. Or if you're still addicted to social media, find us on Instagram and LinkedIn.
We'd like to thank our rockstar production manager, Jadine Stout-Williams.
Now for the boring part. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatment. If you're looking for mental health treatment, please visit the resources page of our website, offtheclockpsych.com.